I am Christine Tobin, Chief Operating Officer for Young Investor Society. I will be your host today, along with Sunny, coming from Rhode Island today. Hey, Sunny. Sunny is on our student advisory board, and he's going to be going through your Unit 7, Lesson 1, Intro to the Investment Thesis. So whenever you're ready, Sunny.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Ms. Tobin. I appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here. And I'm here to talk about one of my personal favorite topics in investing, which is the investment thesis, right? So in essence, the investment thesis really is almost an expression of why you believe in a company, right? It's all about why you believe in a stock. And almost similar to the theses that you might have had to draft in 5-paragraph essays in school, or really in any type of formal writing, an investment thesis is, the driving force. It's the claim, and it's something that you want to make sure is really firm when you start and go into any investment, like whether it's to either long a stock, whether it's to short a stock, whether it's for any interaction with the stock. You want to make sure that your investment thesis is drafted, that you have it somewhere close by so you can always continuously reference it, and that it's something you're always willing to keep in mind. So for me, I participated in the global stock pitch competition last year, and I was pitching a stock called Thermo Fisher Scientific, right? Thermo Fisher Scientific is a manufacturer of laboratory equipment. It's highly responsible for a lot of the medicine and vaccines that you might see today, and providing the equipment needed to manufacture those. So Thermo Fisher Scientific was something that my partner and we really believed in it, right? And to get to that point, we obviously did a stock screen. We looked through a bunch of different stocks that we were passionate about. And then we sort of looked at a lot of different factors that were found within the balance sheet of the company, within its financial statements, and also just qualitative things that we thought were important about Thermo Fisher Scientific. So, we saw a lot of growth potential, for example. We saw that it was expanding into Pacific regions, for example. And that's a huge untapped market for a lot of different groups. So they wouldn't have much competition going forward in there. In addition to that, we also saw a lot of upside in its share price. We felt that the company was undervalued due to the fact that on its balance sheet, its PE multiple and various other factors, it seemed like the company was relatively cheap relative to its industry standards. And we also thought about some of its competitors and what are the barriers to entry in the market. So because Thermo Fisher had been such a large player for in this market and in this industry, because it had been someone who's established and had a lot of power when it came to guiding industry policy, and had a strong group of CEO and board of directors to guide it, we felt that it was a strong investment for us, right? So in that statement that I just made, I kind of listed 3 different things that I thought were really good for Thermo Fisher and why I would invest in it, right? So I was looking at its growth potential, its whether it's undervalued, its PE multiple, different things like that. And in addition, I was also looking at its relative strength to its competitors. So what's its competitive positioning within the industry, right? And those 3 kind of XYZ, if you can think about it like that, were the foundations of my investment theses, right? And so as I was, kind of preparing for the stock pitch and thinking about whether we would pick Thermo Fisher and go ahead with this, I was slowly monitoring its price, day to day, right? Because I was curious, is my investment going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Well, naturally with any stock, it goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways, it goes in a lot of different directions, right? That's what a stock does. No one can really predict it. But when I was looking at Thermo Fisher, I would constantly check back on the investment theses or thesis that my partner and I had laid out. And every single day, I would kind of reference, well, is what's happening in today's news, is whatever the analysts on Wall Street are saying, these equity research analysts, is whatever they're saying relevant to my investment thesis? Well, if it wasn't, then it's something called noise. And you can always ignore noise because it's not really relevant to the performance of the stock. It's just like a temporary thing that's eventually going to go away. But if it was something that affected my investment thesis, I would either say, okay, well, maybe I need to step back from Thermo Fisher for a bit. Maybe I need to readjust my theses. or, maybe this isn't the stock for me that I want to pitch, right? So we were constantly, doing that iterative process to make sure that our investment was sound and that, our belief in our investment is sound, right? We wanted to validate that. So I'm going to pull up an example. It's from Apple, right? As you know, Apple is the manufacturer of iPhones, iPads, almost ubiquitous products. We all use them, right? And let me just pull this up real quick. It's just an example that's actually given by Young Investors Society about why Apple as a whole is, a strong buy case. Like, why would someone want to buy Apple? So here's an example. Let me just scroll down. Can you all see my screen? Yeah? Okay, cool. So in this example, these people from Young Investors Society are kind of looking at Apple as a whole and thinking about why it's a good investment, like why you should buy Apple, right? And so this is their investment thesis. And as you can see, they have 4 bullets listed, each which corresponds to kind of the XYZ aspect of an investment thesis, except they also have a 4th point, right? So the first point that they made was that Apple's strong brand will enable the company to sell their products at premium prices, right? And so what this is referring to is this idea that Apple is so widely known, right? It's prevalent, it's ubiquitous. And because of that, everyone knows of the product and everyone wants it. It's almost like if you've ever been in a situation where everyone around you is doing one thing, you feel the need to conform to. Apple has that power over a lot of its consumers. And that's a very strong power since it influences even people that are reluctant to buy Apple to ultimately join the company in its mission to, deliver Apple products to everyone. Next up is Apple's ecosystem. And about Apple's ecosystem, its interconnected apps, videos, and music fuel a loyal and sticky user base. When I read this part, this was really interesting to me because the word sticky tells me that the people who use Apple are more likely to stay with it for a very long period of time. It's so attractive. It's such a nice option for people that they're willing to purchase Apple products almost no matter what, right? It's kind of like blind loyalty, as kind of hinted at here. Another thing that I thought was relevant was, or that was described as relevant here, is the fact that smartphones and tablets are in their early stages of global adoption, which means that they have a lot of potential in new markets, right? So if you think about it, there's a lot of regions of the world that are not as developed as the United States, right? And because of that, there's a lot of opportunity to reach those consumers through Apple products, right? So because of that, these smartphones and tablets and computers that Apple's offers can have significant growth potential, can lead to new sources of revenue for the company that ultimately will make it more profitable in the future, thus increasing its share price, right? And then finally, Apple's management promotes a culture of innovation and design for consumer electronics, creating a platform for future product launches. So as you remember, with Steve Jobs, he was one of the most innovative people that Apple has ever had in their company, right? He founded the company, he brought it to success, he gave a lot of inspiration to many of the users and workers at Apple. And so this culture of innovation and design is often something that Apple leverages because they have these yearly conferences whenever they do product drops or whenever they unveil the new version of the iPhone. And those conferences are incredibly hyped up. There's a lot of performance, there's a lot of showmanship that is going on there. And so that creates a really big platform for future product launches and a nice culture for innovation, all of which contribute to Apple's success. So these are all 4 very strong points about why you should purchase Apple, right? But there's actually almost a opposite case that can be made about Apple, and that is just as valid, right? So this is almost the sell investment thesis for Apple. And so if you want to look at it, look at this part, it says that Apple competes in the highly competitive industries of PC and smartphones. So looking at this first point, we know that that's very true. There's a lot of different manufacturers, there's a lot of different companies dealing in PCs and smartphones, right? It's not like Apple has no competitors. It's not like there's high barriers to entry. Plenty of people are manufacturing PCs and smartphones. It's just that Apple's product is slightly better or that it is viewed as more accepted in society. Another thing is that history has proven that commoditization for consumer electronics industry is inevitable, which makes Apple's premium prices and exceptionally high margins unsustainable. So this kind of goes back to the concept of a perfect competitor in economics, which is that in the long run, a perfect competitor can never be profitable. And the reason for that is because if one such perfect competitor which means that they are making an undifferentiated product, which is a product that is no different than anything else. Because of that commoditization, other firms will swoop into the industry and try to reduce those profits, which is kind of the case that is being argued here, as more and more consumer electronics companies can come into the industry, making these premium prices and high margins unsustainable. Another third point that was interesting was that after the death of Steve Jobs, Apple's product innovation has noticeably deteriorated. I'm sure that we've all noticed this, right? Like we saw the iPhone come out, we saw the iPad, the Mac, all these brilliant things that we know and love today. But after the death of Steve Jobs, it seemed like the output of Apple, it was kind of at its peak almost, right? They released accessories, wireless chargers, different features, different software, but nothing as revolutionary as the iPhone or the iPad or the Mac. And so that begs the question, was a lot of the reason for Apple's success because they had this history of innovation? And it seems like recently that innovation has declined, making it so that Apple might not be the most sustainable or best investment at the moment. And finally, Apple is highly reliant on their supply chain of components, which they do not control and which will limit future innovation. So for me, this was one of the biggest issues, right? Because being reliant on someone else, being someone who isn't vertically integrated, means that you are dependent on the price that the supplier sets. So if the supplier decides to raise their prices, if they decide to stop selling to Apple, or if there are tariffs or import taxes or different laws that are being created by political situations all around the world, that is going to heavily impact Apple. It limits their future innovation. So these are all different reasons for why you might want to sell or short Apple. And the key point to realize here is that they're just alternate perspectives of looking at the same situation, right? It's less about being right. It's about having something that you are willing to stay consistent with, that you're writing down, and that you're following no matter what, right? Your investment thesis is almost kind of your guideline, right? It's something that you need to follow no matter what, because behavioral finance has shown that people who don't have an investment thesis or who are unable to stick to their investment thesis are likely to either panic sell during a market fall, or are going to try to buy at the top or on the way up instead of buying on the dip, which, as conventional investing wisdom has stated, is probably the best way to make a consistent profit. So as you kind of mentioned before, it's about checking whether or not the investment thesis is still intact. So this is something that you do almost as often as I did with Thermo Fisher, right? Anytime that big news about the company is released, you want to go back to your investment thesis and still check if it's valid, right? And so if it impacts the investment thesis, right? In this case, this doesn't, then it's just called noise, right? It's something that you can ignore because it does not affect the long-term performance of the stock, right? The same is true for this question right here. You have to ask yourself, does it impact either of these 4 factors in your investment thesis? And if not, it's just noise. And then this little joke right here about Tim Cook's hairdo, if it does impact it, then you might need to get the man a comb so that it stops impacting Apple stock price as much, right? But you always want to keep checking new information against the investment thesis to effectively filter out noise, right? And so if you are able to identify something that's not noise, then you want to sell the company, right? Because it's simply not worth your time and risk for you to be proven wrong. So now that I've kind of given a brief overview of an investment thesis, I want to start asking a couple of questions and hopefully foster some group discussion. Is that okay, Ms. Tobin? Yeah, okay, that's cool. All right, so the first question I want to ask is the first one listed right here, is that do you agree more with the investment thesis of buy for Apple, or would you rather sell it? What are some of your reasons for why or why not?
I own one share of Tesla, but I think that I'm sorry, not Tesla. Oh my God, Apple. And I was thinking, I think that Apple definitely is more of a buy because the reasons you stated, of course, and also like it still has a lot more room to grow. I believe in terms of globalization. Like Samsung dominates and other phone companies dominate in a lot of other countries in the world. So if Apple is able to go into those markets, they could make a lot of profit, I think.
You know, it's really interesting because that's kind of the opposite situation of what Samsung is trying to do in the United States, right? Samsung is, kind of the miniature competitor. Apple is like the one that's dominant, and Samsung, is trying to gain market share, but it's struggling. Do you feel that Apple is going to have those same challenges in countries where Samsung dominates?
I think that's definitely a possibility, but you know, I just think that Apple is the superior product. I used to have a Samsung and now I have an Apple, and Samsungs are nice, but I think Apples are just a, a much better way to connect with people and to have fun.
I was in the exact same situation as you, so I can definitely relate. But yeah, that's really good insight there. Does anyone else want to give some feedback about this one?
Well, I mean, continue using the Apple as an example. I think I will definitely stick more with a buy, not because it has like a lot of pros as well, but shorting is not only a big risk, but at the same time, Apple still has a lot of products, still has a big loyal customer base. It has big net margins, and I think a company like Apple, which it is true that they have stopped innovating, but that doesn't mean that, or they haven't innovated as much as before, but they still have a lot of teams and they have a good executive team that is trying to innovate and making things better, and they also have a really good return on equity. So I think in a sense they're using their money well. They're running well, and I think those things also matter, like the financials, and because they kind of complement to why am I investing in this company? Why is this company worth it? And so I think it's good to remain bullish in that sense. So
I like that perspective too. You really combine quantitative and qualitative factors in that analysis, which is something that when you develop your investment thesis is something you really want to do. Because there's often a lot of really niche things that can be found in a company's balance sheet or in its three financial statements, and if you spend the time to look deeply at those, you can really identify, hey, is this company just a good play right now because, for example, it has a lot of debt so it's heavily undervalued, or is it taking on too much debt and it's maybe at the risk of collapsing, or it might have to do major restructuring. A lot of those things can be hidden inside the balance sheet, and if you spend enough time combing through it, you're going to find a lot of unique perspectives that are not told often by the qualitative factors. So I think that's really smart of you to kind of explore that perspective.
Oh, sorry, I was just in the zone. Much like musicians and surgeons or professional basketball players, it's important for investors to cancel out the noise and avoid distractions. Before investing in a company, you need to carefully think out what your investment thesis is. An investment thesis is basically a clear and simple description of three variables: why you own the company, what you expect to happen, and what you as an investor see that others don't see. Basically, it's your 140-character version of why you think you're smarter than the market. Famous investor Martin Whitman said it best. He said, "Based on my own personal experience as an investor, rarely do more than 3 or 4 variables really count. Everything else is just noise." A strong investment thesis will act as an anchor for the rough waters that lay ahead. If we know why we own a particular stock, then we won't panic when the turbulence inevitably occurs. I learned the power of an investment thesis early on in my investment career. In 2007, we came across a company from South Korea that made online video games. Their existing games had a remarkably sticky user base, paying subscription fees every month. The games had 2 powerful things that we look for in great companies: a network effect, which meant that the more kids that played the game, the more attractive the game became for others. And second, high switching costs. When someone had invested years and leveling up their character and amassing virtual items, they were unlikely to switch to go play another game. However, the video game industry is unpredictable and hit or miss at best. So we wrote an investment thesis for the company. 1, the existing games we thought would keep their user base. 2, we knew that it was a hit or miss industry, but eventually they would have a hit. And 3, the current stock price was cheap. Shortly after buying the stock, the company launched a big new game. Here it was. The game had all the makings of a blockbuster, substantial buzz in the gaming community, a legendary lead developer, 3 full years of development, a huge marketing budget, and really positive reviews. The game hit the shelves and then it miraculously flopped. It just simply didn't sell. And we watched the stock price fall from the company by nearly 50% in a month. Did I feel sick to my stomach? Absolutely. I stumbled back to the drawing board, looked at my investment thesis, and said, was that investment thesis still intact? 1, did the company still have a sticky, loyal user base? Yes. Was the development team still likely to have a hit at some point in the future? Yes. Was the stock cheap? Yes, even more so than before. That meant that all the despair in the market was actually just noise. In 2008, the company launched another game. This time the expectations were even higher. The launch was timed for the holiday season and was even more highly regarded than the previous launch. The game hit the shelves and lo and behold, another flop. The stock price plummeted by another 40%. Our clients began to notice the poor performance. Most every other investor sold, but we actually had the audacity to add to our position. Not one thing had changed from the original investment thesis, except for the stock price, which looked a whole lot more attractive now than it ever had. Some may call this sticking to your guns. Some may call this just being flat out stubborn. Investors like to call this high conviction. Despite what you call it, our conviction came from having a clearly defined investment thesis, giving us the ability to tune out the noise. The following year, the company launched another game that was largely ignored by the market because it was more of a niche game for an Asian audience. Everyone's expectations were rock bottom after the previous failures. The game was released and it turned out to be one of the best-selling video games of all time in Korea, and then later went on to be a blockbuster hit in China. The stock price shot through the roof. 2 years later, the company followed it up with another successful game launch, and the stock re-rated even higher. From our initial investment, we had now made over a 400% return. Our clients were dancing in the aisles. I have no doubt that if we had...
I guess the lesson from that video we just saw by James Fletcher, that's honestly one of the most inspiring stories I've heard in the markets. So, go stick to your guns, have a solid investment thesis, and, always constantly reassess depending on what's going on. Because I'm sure that if you ever find yourself in a situation like Mr. Fletcher did, then I'm sure, you're going to feel the panic. You're going to want to sell. But it's all about checking what's noise and making sure that whatever's going on with the stock is not something that affects your thesis. So yeah, I think that's my lesson. So hopefully it was nice.
Excellent job. Thanks so much, Sunny, on giving us the introduction to the investment thesis. Did anyone have any questions for Sunny? No, looks like we're good. All right, Sunny, thank you so much. I'm going to introduce David Portal is here with us today. David is going to be talking about money managers. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to David whenever you're ready. Let me make sure that you're unmuted.
Yeah, it's always the old guy that mutes himself. I've had that conversation with so many people over the last year. You're on mute. So if I had $1 for every time someone said that to me as well. So can you hear me now, everyone? Okay, wonderful. I'm so excited to be here. I'm more excited that for work presentations and more nervous actually as well. But I'm so happy because I never did this when I was in high school. And I had, Christine was kind enough to send me some videos or access to some videos. And I was blown away by how eloquent you guys were talking about investment, how passionate you were about it. Many of us got that passion in university or after university. And so what you'll find out is that passion never really ends, right? Learning about businesses and companies is fun. It may not be a career for you, but it's always something that's well worth learning and studying, because you could use it in any field of life that you go into. And maybe you'll get an idea when I talk about this today. So I guess what I'll do is I'll share my screen now. And I've only used Zoom once before, because my company doesn't allow us to use Zoom. And this is the only second time I've done it, and the first time on doing a presentation. I think it'll be just fine though. We'll to go. So what I want to talk about today is money managers, who they are, what they do. Specifically, we're going to focus on mutual fund managers, and I'll explain why that is. We're going to talk about evaluating and comparing managers and what you can learn from them so that you can become a better investor. And then we're going to summarize at the end and maybe do an FAQ as well. Now, I've only got 2 hours, right, Christine?
No, you actually only have 30 minutes. Is that
30
okay?
minutes. Unbelievable. I'm just kidding, everyone. She told me that I have that short period of time. So what I'm going to be is I'm going to be specific on some things, general, and some other things because of the time limit. But during the FAQ, please feel free to ask me any questions you want. And if you stump me, I just will, I'll say my Zoom doesn't work. So we'll start with this. Think of it this way. There's 2 types of investors. There's big and small. There's institutional and there's retail. Institutional will be companies and organizations. They collect money from other people and they invest it. Retail would be you, me, Christine, your host. She's retail. I'm retail. Your mom and dad are retail. We're the small investors, but we can still be very successful. Now, if you look at the 2 different types, who's on the different sides, right? Institutional would be big managers like mutual funds companies, hedge funds, which are like mutual funds, except not as regulated. And certainly they can do a little more, and they basically have higher minimums as well. Banks, credit unions, universities, pension funds, endowment funds, all of you are going to have some relationship with institutional money in your lives. You might have it already and you don't know it. Your university might be funded by a mutual fund. You might go get a job, and your pension fund, every time they take money out of your check every week or every month, might go into a retirement fund that's managed by an institutional manager. So it's very important to understand how they are and who they are. And by the way, you compete with them all the time. Every time you buy or sell a stock, there's institutional investors involved somehow. So like I said, retail is you and I and everybody else. So what are the sort of distinguishes either side, right? Because there's attributes to either side. So on the institutional side, typically they're very sophisticated. They're very savvy people. They have their finance degrees, typically, not always, but they usually have some sort of degree in finance, and they're very savvy. They've been around, they're experienced, and they have teams of people. Most of them you'll find out these days are CFAs, which is a financial designation that some of you might have in the future. They do big trades, and I'll give you a great example of that in a moment. They take a team approach. You're learning to invest by yourselves, and maybe you're sharing information, but you're pretty much on your own, deciding what you want to do and how you want to do it. Where institutions have big teams of people that help out. They've got access to company executives. What I mean by that, let's say I wanted to buy some Tesla today. I call up and I say, hi, my name's David Portal. I'm investing some money in Tesla. I want to talk to Elon Musk. Hello? Hello? Nobody's there. Well, they hang up on me because they don't know me. They don't care who I am. And so there's a difference. Institutional manages lots of money. So when they call up and they say, we manage $500 billion and we'd like to talk to Elon Musk or someone at the company, they get some access. We don't have that access. And what that means for you is you guys create your own research. You can, but most of you, 99% of individual investors are going to use someone else's research. And there's a big difference because institutional investors will create their own research. They'll talk to the companies and they'll do it that way. And so why are we going to focus on mutual fund managers, not the endowment funds or the pension funds or the hedge funds? It's because the mutual fund managers are the most transparent. You have all their information online and you can follow them. And I would urge you to follow them. And we'll talk about some of these things at the end as well. Plus 47, almost half of the US households own mutual funds. As I said, they're in part of your life. They might be funding your university. You might be using them someday to fund your kids' university. So now that we've decided we're going to focus on mutual funds, let's think about buying. Okay, if I gave you each $5,000 now, if Christine and I gave you each $5,000 right now, I want you to think about what you would buy. Okay, give it some thought. Now, what if we gave you $50,000, right? 10 times as much. What would you buy now? Because if you were an institutional manager, you'd have to think about these things in bigger numbers. Now, what if we gave you 500 million? I think when I said 5,000, many of you were thinking about one stock. You thought about your favorite stock. I'm going to buy this one, whether it's Tesla or Amazon or some high-flying game stock, right? But if you have a lot of money to manage, you want to invest in more than one stock. You want to be diversified. In fact, you can do it with $500, invest in a bunch of companies. A mutual fund is just a investment structure where a company can invest many people's money at one time in different companies. So they don't buy one company. They could buy 25 companies. They could buy 200. They could buy 300. But they've got lots of money to do it. And so they have to be very careful about the decisions they make. And they want to make their investors money. So here's a sort of how they go about it, we're going to talk about. But when we're talking about size, these are the largest actively managed funds in right now in the US and in Canada. I'm based in Canada. I grew up in the States. I lived there for many, many years, and I lived the last 21 years in Canada. So I think of things from an American and Canadian perspective often. So if you look at the US, the Fidelity Contra Fund is the biggest actively managed fund in the world right now, $131 billion. Can you imagine investing that kind of money, you guys? 131 million. How many companies you'd have to buy? In Canada, the biggest one is 44 billion, and that's a collection of funds actually they put together. So it's a little bit different, but still $44 billion. And so if you look at where to invest your money, we've talked about institutional managers, but we haven't talked about what they buy. They could buy anything. Some of them buy real estate, some buy stocks, some buy bonds. The most popular are stocks and bonds, and that's the thing that you're probably talking about mostly in your investment classes or courses. And I'm pretty sure that you're probably talking about more stocks because bonds people think are boring. They're not actually. They're quite exciting, but we're going to focus on equities here. Now, let's compare the two. You know, you've heard probably bonds are safe, stocks are risky. Well, stocks are considered risky for a couple of reasons. One, because they're more, you buy one stock, there's more of a risk that it can go to zero. In mutual funds, you're buying so many stocks, the risk is almost zero that can happen. But let's use your family as an example. Let's say your parents are going to drive you to high school. You got to decide who you want to drive you. And dad says, I'm going to drive you. And you go, I don't know, Dad. Dad got into 2 accidents over the last year and he drives too fast. And so I don't want to drive with Dad. I want to drive with Mom. She's safer. So Mom's like your bond. She's safe. But your sister says, wait a second. Those 2 accidents weren't Dad's fault. And by the way, he gets me there in time. And Mom, sometimes I'm late. So I want to go with Dad. So she's willing to invest in Dad, if you will. She wants to take a little more risk. There's reason to do that. And your other sibling says, you know what? I don't care who drives me. So they want to buy bonds and stocks. And what I mean by that is a lot of it is personality. When you're investing money professionally for people, you realize that people have emotions that they bring into them with this investment. So for example, you can get someone skiing and put them on a green run, not a problem. You put them on a black run, very, very different. And so your job is, if you're investing money for a living, is to understand who's investing, who you're investing with. If you're doing it like for your mom or your dad, if you're investing for a bunch of people, you don't have that luxury, you invest one way. And so when you buy a mutual fund, you kind of have to decide what you're buying and what you want to have in that fund, and what kind of risk you want to take, which we'll talk about in a moment. So equities and fixed income, we're going to focus on equity side, right? And so as I mentioned, equities, you're going to take a little more risk, but it's a little more fun, I guess, to talk about Tesla and Amazon. That is to talk about fixed income. So if we're going to buy a fund, for example, we have to think about what kind of fund we buy, because if you're managing money, even for you as an investor, you can buy whatever you want. If I did give you $1 billion or $500 million, you can buy whatever you want. You can buy in Canada, you can buy in the United States, you can buy in Asia, you can buy in anywhere you want. And so we're going to talk about that as the first decision. If we were going to buy a mutual fund or consider a mutual fund manager, we have to talk about where we want to go. We can go to US, Canada, international, which would be outside North America. We can buy the world. Well, if I asked each of you, take a long time, and we probably disagree. So I'm going to say we're going to go global. We're going to buy the whole world. We can buy anywhere we want. So we've decided on global. Now we have to think about, okay, we're decided around, we're going to buy companies anywhere around the world in this mutual fund. But what style are we going to buy? We can buy value, which today might be, let's say, an oil and gas company, because they're not as popular anymore for a lot of different reasons. We can buy growth, which would be, let's say, like Facebook and Amazon. We can buy momentum, which is companies that are doing really well right now, that are really, hot right now, that we want to buy. Could be like gaming companies or something, or pandemic type companies, right? For example. And so we have to decide, well, a lot of funds own all of these things, and most funds own a little bit of everything. But let's say we want to focus on growth because, again, we want to buy these companies like tech companies and things like that, or healthcare. Healthcare is a growth industry these days. And so we've decided we're going to buy a global equity fund. We're going to buy a growth global equity fund. But we still have to decide on the size, because stocks are different sizes, right? Here in Canada, if I bought like a Denny's restaurant, I think they have them in Canada, in the States as well, I'm pretty sure, that would be like a mid cap or a small company, where a large company would be any company 10 billion and up. So if you take all the stock prices, all the shares outstanding for company, multiply it by the stock price, that's what you get, this thing called market capitalization, which is just size, large, small, medium. So large would be 10 billion and up, medium would be 2 to 10 billion, and small would be under that, about 300 to 2 billion. So if we're going to buy these big tech companies and these big healthcare companies, we're probably going to be mostly large cap. So let's decide large cap companies. So what does it all add up to? We looked at geography, we looked at style, we looked at size, we looked at equities instead of bonds. We're going to buy a large cap global equity growth fund. And so that's what we want to do. But we want to evaluate this fund, right? So how do we evaluate? There's different ways to do it. And there's a big, important, and very popular method called the 4 Ps. And it's called 4 Ps because the way you look at it is all the letters are spelled with P: people, philosophy, process, and performance. What does that mean? Well, people are very important because it's not just that people have to be smart. We assume they're smart. We assume they're hardworking. We want to know what kind of experience they have in doing what they do. So we've talked about global equity growth fund. Well, let's say we meet them, for example, and they say, well, we don't really have experience in there. We've only bought small companies and we've only bought them in Canada. Well, maybe we're not as confident because they don't have the experience in what we want. What else do we want to know? Who's helping them? Like, who's their back office? What kind of experience do all the people on the team have, right? Maybe the lead guy doesn't have a lot of experience, but his other team does. Maybe he has experience, but his whole team doesn't. That would concern me. What's their track record? Not in performance, but like, what have they done? How many funds have they managed? What's their background? Things like that. What's their experience in the kind of companies that we want to buy? They might say, yeah, we have global experience, but we've only really bought restaurants and things like that. Maybe we don't want to own just restaurants. So people is very important to evaluate who's running the money, not just 1 or 2 people, the whole team. The investment philosophy, what you're really asking is, what is the best way to manage money? What do they think? Because remember, we've got a global growth fund, so we think maybe growth is the best way to go. But what does that mean? And for example, what is our edge? Every time you buy a stock, you have to think you have an edge. So when you're buying a stock, for example, what you're telling yourself is that you know something about this company. You know something about this company that you're confident enough to buy. You've done the research and you feel somebody's missing something. Because if you're buying something that you're basically saying you think the price is going to go up. And if you think the price is going to go up, it's because you think that you know something, right? Maybe there's been bad news that people are overestimating. So philosophy, I want to know, if we're looking for a manager, we want to know what is their philosophy on managing money. Maybe their philosophy is that buying global large caps, they have an edge because they think that people sell them too fast because they get nervous and they sell them too fast. So maybe buying them long-term is their way to go. Or maybe they think people get nervous and when they sell them fast, they can go pick them up at a cheaper price. So we want to know what their philosophy is, how they think before we buy this fund. And so process is important because, okay, we vetted the people and we like the people. Check. We've decided, we've looked at their philosophy, we like their philosophy and agree with it. Check. What is their process now? Which means you've got this idea, how do you put it into action? There's a lot of people who have a lot of good ideas and they don't get implemented. I had a great idea. I'm going to work out every day and I think it's going to help me because I'm going to be in better shape, but my bike and my weights just sit there, right? So we want to put it into action. So what's their process? How are they going to do this? So if they say they have an edge, how are they going to find these companies? Do they have a computer system, a research tool that they can break down the companies and figure out? Are they going to meet with people in person? And what kind of questions are they going to ask? How are they going to get information that's going to be differentiate them from everyone else? How are they going to compare them to other people? What tools do they have to compare one company to another company? How are they going to buy that? You know, because if you've got $50 billion, how are you going to make those trades? Those are big trades, right? What is the process for everything they're doing? So we talked about people, we talked about philosophy and process. What's next? The obvious one, and this is the one people make a mistake they look at first, is investment performance. What are the rates of return? And it's not what the rate of return over today or a year, it's over different time periods. It could be, what is your investment performance for your whole career? Since this fund has been open, what is the performance has been over the last 5 years? What about the last 10 years? What about the last year? What about a bad year? You've got good performance over time, but every time there's a bad year, you do really bad, right? And the reason we ask that is because some of us who want to buy the fund might be very nervous, right? And in a bad year, we want to get out, we won't hold on to it. So we want to make sure we're comfortable with this. Or maybe we've decided we've got a very high risk tolerance. We don't mind. We don't mind in a bad year if they go down a lot, if we have a big belief that over time they'll do better than other people. We have no problem with that. So we've looked at the 4 things and we've looked at them in different ways. But here's the problem. They put these disclaimers on all the funds you buy when you get the paperwork, that past performance is not indicative of the future. And I'll give you an example. Some of you have played fantasy football or fantasy hockey, or your parents have played it. All it is every year your friends get together and you all chip in money, like $20 or something, just for fun. And you bet on, and you set a team, you select a team. And every year people select the players that did the best every year and the teams that did best. So if I was going to pick a team, I would pick Tampa Bay Buccaneers in football because they did the best. If I were to pick a player, I'd pick the MVP if I went first. And what you find out is that it's not that easy, because it's very hard to repeat as a Super Bowl champion or a World Series champion or a soccer champion every year. In fact, it's nearly impossible, very difficult. Well, you'll find with investments too, same thing. So there's a word of caution there. So how do we compare? Most people, not savvy investors like you, but most people will look at 2 funds, look at performance and say, well, clearly Fund A is better. We've got Fund A here did 10%, Fund B did 7.5%. This is easy. I'm going to buy fund that did 10%. But hold on a second. Remember, we used the mom and dad example, right? Just because dad got to school faster doesn't mean he was that was the best thing to do. I mean, maybe he's a very dangerous driver, but maybe mom's too conservative. So we got to figure out what the deal is here. How do we compare? Here's how we do it. Well, first, an analogy. If you look at a high school wrestling class, they do things, they compare as well. They're not going to let a 100-pound boy wrestle a 300-pound boy. So they put them in weight classes. So these are the actual weight classes in high school for wrestling. So you'll see here, like girls 101 pounds, up to 101 pounds, they can wrestle each other. Up to between 101 and 109, they can wrestle each other, and so on. Same with the boys. So what they're saying is that they want similar weights to wrestle each other because they find it fair. Well, if you look at investments, for example, these are balanced funds. These are funds where they have mom and dad. They have bonds and equities in the portfolios. And if you look at the categories, it's very illuminating because, for example, if you look here, Canadian equity balance means that it's mostly Canadian stocks with fixed income. But you can have 60 to 90% asset allocation over here. So you can have 60, 90% stocks in that portfolio. What does that mean? You could be comparing A and B and saying A did better, but then you find out, wait a second, A had 90% in stocks and the other one had 60% in stocks. So actually did quite well. It took a lot less risk. And so it becomes that we have to make a fair comparison, right? To really evaluate. And so let's talk about how we compare with numbers and more. And we're going to look at something called quantitative, which you're already doing, and qualitative, which you're probably doing as well. But quantitative is numbers. That's easy. We can look it up online. Qualitative is a little bit different. And I'll use an example. When you buy a house, when your parents buy a house, apartment, townhouse, whatever it is, there's 2 things they look at. Quantitative is the money stuff. What's the cost of the house? What are the costs of the other houses? What do we think the house is going to be worth, when we sell it in 5 or 10 years or whatever? That's important. qualitative is equally or greater important. And if it wasn't that important, your parents would just buy over the phone, right? They'd look at the price and just call it the realtor and buy, but they don't do that because they need to know about the qualitative. What does that mean? All these things I put here. When you buy a house the first time, you aren't just going to be interested in the price. You're going to ask, is it, does it have a backyard? Does the backyard have grass? Is it near the school? Because I want the kids to go to a school nearby or a good school. Is it near a good school? Is it near a bus or a train, right? Because if we have to drive to always go to the bus, maybe it's not as efficient. So that's the qualitative stuff. That's all the important stuff in going to making a purchase. That's much more important than just the numbers. So if you look at these different metrics to evaluate, the quantitative would be the rate of return, obviously, but it's much more than that. Standard deviation, Sharpe. I don't know how much you've delved into this. Because we have limited time, I won't go into it deep. But we can do it in the FAQs, or I can, or you can delve into yourself. But standard deviation is just variation from a mean, from an average. So, for example, if I run 3 days in a row, and I run 10 miles an hour, my standard deviation is 0. If I do it every time, because I haven't varied, I'm doing the same every time. If I ran 5 miles an hour one day, 10 miles an hour another day, and 20 miles an hour, my standard deviation is much wider. So standard deviation just measures the variance around the average. Now, why is that important? Because you take on more risk in that way. If you buy something that doesn't move that much, there's not a lot of risk, but there's not a lot of return as well. So people factor that in because comfort level is important. Sharpe ratio measures that as well, but it measures a return versus variation. So what it says basically is that we don't mind, we like the return, but we want to make sure that the risk is worth it. Because if we're getting a okay return, but taking a lot of risk, it's not worth it. If we're getting a good return and a decent risk, then it's probably a better investment. Sortino, alpha, beta, R squared, all very important. Qualitative, we talked about a house, right? And the backyard and near school. Well, qualitative for a fund would be the investment thesis. What are the investment thesis? What is the edge that they have on global growth equities that we talked about? Sector weightings, for example, you can get 2 growth funds like we talked about, and we can evaluate them both. But one says we got 20% technology in the portfolio. In other words, 20% of the stocks are technology. The other one says we don't like technology, we have 5%. It's a big difference. Who's right, who's wrong? We'll see. Cash policy, very important. As you probably know, last year in February during the pandemic, the whole market went down, some more than others. Well, some managers were able to raise cash. They sold and they had a lot of cash and they went to buy stuff really cheap. And so some managers don't have those policies. They say, we don't, that's not our job. We don't do that. So we might have, as a group who are buying a fund, an idea that we want one or the other. That's important. Currency policy. I live in Canada. What does that mean? When I go to Disneyland as a Canadian now, and I pay $100 to get in, I pay it on my credit card. I look at my statement back in Canada, it's $130. It's 30% difference. That's the currency difference here. And so what that means for you as Americans, most of you, or Canadians, for example, if I buy an American fund, I take on currency risk. That means if the fund does 10%, I don't necessarily get 10% because if the Canadian dollar goes, for example, down, I'll make more money. So if the Canadian dollar goes down 10% against the American, I'll make 20%. If it goes up 10%, my gain is completely wiped out. So some managers will hedge currency. I won't get too much into that, but they'll use some different investment tools so that they take the risk out, but it costs money. So we have to decide, do we want our manager to do that? Do we want them to worry about currency? Are we afraid of it? And then do they invest their own money? I said at the beginning that institutionals don't invest their own money. Well, they don't have to, but often they do. Fund managers will tell their clients, my own money's in the fund. So my money's taking risk with you. So now what have we done? We've made equals, right? Global large cap equity growth fund with global large cap equity growth fund. And now we can compare. We can look at the rates of return. We can look at the standard deviation. We can look at the alpha. We can look at the Sharpe ratio. We can look at the 4 Ps. This is a fair way to compare 2 different funds now because we've done the work. And you guys are already doing the work, to your credit here. So who's better, institutional or retail, right? If I took a vote, I'm sure that you guys would say retail, institutional, say institutional. There's no such thing. I don't like words as better, and I don't like good or bad, because when you build a portfolio for yourself, all it is a byproduct of your preferences. If I think that I should have 50% in Canada in my portfolio, well, then I'm right because I've done my research and I think it's right for me. If you want 50% US in your portfolio, or 80%, and you've done the research, then it's right for you. You decided you want a growth equity portfolio and I want a value portfolio, balance fund, that's for me. So there's no such thing as better. You guys have many advantages, and the advantage is that you don't have anyone telling you what to do with your own money. With mutual funds, a lot of times if they're not doing well, they get a lot of complaints. And sometimes they'll make changes that maybe they're driven to make by the crowd screaming, right, if you will, and the letters they're getting and the complaints. You don't have that problem. So what are the common skills of a mutual fund manager? If you wanted to go become a money manager, whether it was for a hedge fund or a pension fund or whatever, or a mutual fund, curiosity is number one. Absolutely. If you're a curious person, you can potentially become a fund manager, a money manager, because curiosity is you need it in this business. You have to be curious about businesses. When you walk into businesses, you have to think, how does this work? How do they make money? Because you're going to do a lot of reading and you're going to do analyzing. And if you're not curious about it, it's a really boring job. Avid readers. Every manager I know is an avid reader. They read everything, and not just financial stuff. They read all sorts of stuff, history, sociology, entertainment, and they feel it all helps them, right? Because when you're investing all sorts of kind of companies. And so it's good to know, the more you know, the better. And curious people like to read. Analytical, very important. You need skills of analysis, because a lot of people, like I said, between A and B, they'll look at that one number for A and they'll make a decision based on that. If I go to a store and I want to look for a camera, I don't just get the cheapest camera because I know it might not last as long. Same with clothes. So you want to be analytical. Competitive, absolutely you want to be competitive. You want to be the best at what you can be. You need to have ability to withstand pressure, because you're going to have a lot of pressure, because you're going to be investing money for people. And sometimes you're going to go through bad periods. I heard somebody talking just before I started about something going down. Well, you might have heard in the last couple of weeks, the market's gone down. And so some of the funds are down 15% in a month. And so believe me, they're getting pressure, right? And so you have to be able to keep to your philosophy and process and withstand that pressure. And you need a team mindset. No one does it alone. Everybody, you guys are working as a team. Well, all these mutual fund managers have teams, very capable, smart people telling them we don't agree or we disagree. And you have to be able to be a team member. Christine, how much time do I have about?
Like 5 minutes.
Oh, great. I'm perfectly on time then. This is beautiful. So we talked about one fund, but in reality, you're not going to buy one fund. You're going to buy more than one fund. Why is that? Well, a lot of reasons. One, diversification. I don't have one now here, but there's an old Joe. Oh, here it goes. I'll grab it at this desk here. So if I took a pen and I tried to break it, I could break it easily, one pen. But if I took a bunch of pens in my hand, I couldn't break it. It's too many. And so think of like a mutual fund or an institutional money manager as that. They have so many different companies. It's not going to go to zero, but they want to diversify. They've got a lot of money. They don't want to put all their bets on one thing, because you will be wrong eventually. For example, a lot of people go to what's popular, and they go to what's popular, but if you stuck with what's popular forever, you would find out it's not popular. Look at music, right? Music today, most of the popular stuff is rap music. Before it was maybe country music, then rock music, and it may change again, right? And so things go in and out of fashion. So you want managers who are very flexible. So if we're going to have a lot of money and we want to buy things, we probably want to buy a number of managers. So we want to build something called a portfolio, which means we want a collection of managers, and we'll decide how many, but we want to use sort of a checklist, a process. And this is the process we would use. We would think of called what asset classes do we want? In other words, remember we talked about risky dad and conservative mom. Now, some of you would say, I'd go with mom, I'd go with dad. Some would say both of you. So let's talk about that. What asset classes do I want in a portfolio? In reality, most people who invest don't have 100% stocks, because they can't handle the volatility. They just can't. And so they'll have some fixed income in there, because fixed income gives them that comfort level to withstand the bad times for the stocks. So what asset classes do you want? Typically, the typical ones are cash, stocks, and bonds. Now they have different things, alternative investments, real estate, all sorts of things, but let's stick with those for now. Stocks, cash, and bonds. So you have to decide what you want. Do you want 80% stocks, 20% bonds, 5% cash? You want to think about that. Then the next question is geographical. So I've decided I want, let's say, a 50-50 portfolio. I don't want any cash. I want stocks and bonds, 50% each for all my money. Well, Okay, great. Where am I going to invest it? Should I do it all in the States? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of other places that do really, really well. Maybe I should have some other countries, right? And so where am I going to invest geographically? And then I have to think of style. So let's say I've decided on a global one like we did earlier. I've got a global balanced fund. Now I have to think, what kind of style do I want, right? Do I want growth? Do I want value? Do I want a manager that does all those things, right? And they're all very different. Some of it will be based on what your vision of the future is. I think value is coming back. It's been underrated, and I like an underdog. I'm going to buy value. Other people say, oh, I don't think so. I want to buy the stuff that's popular now, more the growthy stuff. And some of you say, I want a manager that has a little bit of both. So, and you might just get several managers that do different things. One growth manager, one value manager, one momentum manager, perfectly fine. Now, what size do you want? In actuality, most people have large cap. And a lot of large cap managers, when I started in the business 20 years ago, managers were very compartmentalized, meaning that a large cap manager really bought just large cap stocks, mid cap, small cap. Now it's very, very fluid. Most large cap managers have mid cap in there as well. And the reason they say that is they need more flexibility. And most small caps have mid caps. So it's not as compartmentalized as it used to be. But let's say we decided we want a large cap manager that buys mid caps as well. We decide on that. And then active or passive. I did not discuss passive because that would have been a bigger discussion. But passive means we don't have a manager. We look at an index like the S&P 500 or the TSX in Canada. You've probably talked about that in your investing classes. And we've decided we just want to buy that because we like these companies and we don't think managers add value. So we want to buy that. Or we might want to buy both. A lot of people love both. I like cats and dogs. Some people like cats, some people like dogs, some people like both. I like active and passive. So I think they both can work. And then how many are we going to have? In other words, we've decided we want all these things, but how many managers do you want? For example, we've decided we want a US manager. We want 20% in the US, let's say. Well, do we have 2 managers, 10% each? Do we have 4 managers, 5%? Or do we have 1 manager, 10%? There's different reasons to do either of them. And again, it comes down to your preferences. The beauty about building a portfolio is you get to decide it on your preferences. And I know I said 5 steps in there. So I'm looking at it and I notice I have more than 5 steps because I added something later on. So it's not that my math is that bad. So what you can learn from mutual fund managers, you can learn to evaluate businesses and people. Because remember, it's not just about the business, it's the people running the business, which is just as important, if not more important. You can learn buying investments that are unpopular. There are a lot of managers after the pandemic went and bought cruise ships, and they would have done very well if they bought them a couple months after. They bought hotels where most people were hiding under their desk and said, I would never buy that, right? There are people that bought Amazon in February when the pandemic was announced. It was very brave to do that. They'll teach you how to sell. Right now, you're learning how to buy probably most of the time. You need to learn how to sell things. You don't want to hold things forever for various reasons, right? And so companies, when they're doing well and they continue well, certainly can hold them forever. But in reality, a lot of companies will go through dry spells for long periods of time, and you have a finite amount of money. You have a certain amount of money to use, that means, and you don't want to waste it on something that isn't doing well. You can give it some time, but if you don't want to sit in it for 5 years and it do nothing, it's a waste of money. So you want to learn, they're teaching you how to sell and how to build investment portfolios. You can read their reports. They publish, a lot of them publicize them for free online. And so I'm going to end with suggested reading. And I don't know how to get this to you. You can take a screenshot, if you will, of my screen, or we can email it to you. I'm not sure, put it on a site. But the first book, Peter Lynch, was a legendary, I think he was the largest fund manager at the time for Fidelity. And his book is brilliant. It is still the best book, even though it was 1994. Best book I've ever read, and his follow-up book on mutual fund managing. Things have changed. When I started the business 21 years ago, and when this was around, we did business in fractions. In other words, when you talked about a stock, you talked about it as $52 and an eighth, $37 and 7/8. So we were very proud that we knew how to convert fractions into decimals. And so wonderful book to read. I highly recommend it, and maybe revised. You can get it in the library probably, or order it on Amazon or bookstore. Warren Buffett is one of the legendary managers of all time. His shareholder letters are worth the price of admission. The price is actually $0. You can get them for free. There's the link. He is such a good manager, but he's also great at articulating things in a very simple way. And he talks about the language of finance as well. So a lot of the complex things you're talking about, he'll talk about as well. Winning the Loser's Game by Charles Ellis is a book that contradicts almost everything I said, because he doesn't believe active managers add any value. So I gave you a little bit of that at the end, but I would read that as well, because you want to read the other side as well. And you may agree with both sides or take a position that managers or passive is better. And the last one is behavioral. You want to learn for yourself what some of the behavioral mistakes that you make. In other words, what will scare you out of a stock? Because I heard that gentleman before me talking about something like that. What would scare you out of a stock that you should hold on to? What would make you buy something that you shouldn't buy, or sell something you shouldn't sell? So Why Smart People Make Big Money Mistakes, wonderful book. I suggest all of them. And so summarize, we've discussed it on institutional money managers, specifically fund managers. I picked them because they're very transparent. As I mentioned, you can go online for free and check out, read their reports, find out about them, track them, see how they're doing. You can look at their holdings to see what they're buying. You can go on something called morningstar.com and look at their top 10 holdings, and it'll show you when they bought them. So you'll see, oh, they bought Amazon in February. Wow, they did this, they did that. You can evaluate and compare. I'm better because you're seeing what they're doing. And you can learn a lot of how to be a better investor just by watching them and competing with them as well. And you're probably going to be doing business with them in the future anyway. But thank you, everyone, for being very patient through my presentation there. And end of slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us today. Does anyone have any questions for David?
Yeah. First, I just want to say, really nice job with the presentation. I got a lot from it. I felt it was very informative. One question I did have was about the contra fund, actually.
Yeah.
I'm an investor in the contra fund. Like I have a few dollars invested in there.
Oh, wonderful.
And so I was just wondering, they have so many assets under management, right? And when they make a trade, when they place a trade to either buy or sell, they're going to have to use like a good portion of their assets to do it, right? So what's the effect of that? Does it like move an entire market in a sense, because they have so much volume and so much money being at risk at the time?
Absolute great question. What he means, for people who don't understand what he means, is that if you put in a small trade, you do a $50 trade, $100 trade, it doesn't move the market. What he means by moving the market is that if people see that a trade is coming in for $1 billion or Trump, they get scared and they go, oh my, what's going to happen here? Maybe then the stock will get killed. So big money managers have to be very careful. So what they'll do is they have to do something. They have a lot of traders they work with, and those guys who have to be very secretive and sometimes do a little bit of sales at a time over time. It's hard for them to sell it one day, but sometimes they'll find someone who needs it. So let's say they need another fund manager that wants to buy what they're selling. So they do a cross. They'll say, okay, we want to sell, $5 million worth. You want to buy 5 million? Okay. And they do it that way, but they're extremely good at what they do. So yes, if they didn't do it in a very intelligent way and a secretive way, it would move the market. It'd be very difficult for them to unload those positions, but they've been doing it for years and they're exceptional at doing it. And so how do you track this fund? Do you read do you go online and read some of their letters, the managers' letters and things like that?
A little bit. I've been paying attention mostly to their holdings at the moment because I feel like that's what's been, I guess, what's of most concern to me. I also just, occasionally log into my Fidelity IRA account and I check out, the position, how much it's worth, and, whether it's on the dip or whether it's going up. So I mostly use the metrics that are listed through the Fidelity platform. But yeah, going through the shareholder letters and different things like that would also be interesting. Yeah,
what's useful about going through letters, everyone, is that you can go in the past as well. They usually have the old stuff, so you can see what did he say a year ago, and did he do it? Did he change his philosophy? Because that's where you really want to evaluate managers, and that's the ones that are really good. Those are the ones I respect, where I can look back and go, okay, yeah, they did exactly what they say. Now, it doesn't mean they can't change. For example, let's say they were going to do take a certain approach, but then the pandemic came. They can change their approach, absolutely, right? But it's wonderful to read that stuff because you really learn a lot about their mindset and their philosophy and what they do. But thank you very much for the question. Excellent question.
Thank you.
Sure, Jack.
In your presentation, you stressed the importance of getting your clients to trust you and understanding their emotions.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how you approach creating a good connection with your clients and making sure you're understanding how they're feeling and they start to trust you.
Absolute great question. That is a fantastic question. That is the thing that nobody thinks about when they manage money for a living until they do it. Mutual funds don't have to worry because they never see their clients, right? You're buying it through someone else. They never meet their clients. They might get nasty letters, but they don't meet them. If you're an individual investment advisor, broker, or something like that, you see your clients. And so I think of myself or people advisors like ski pros. A ski pro knows he's a good skier, but he can't assume the person that comes to him is a good skier. So you have in skiing green, blue, and black. Black, as you know, being the more expert, blue in the middle, green. So I think of it as I need to figure out whether they belong on green, blue, or black, because people don't know sometimes, or they exaggerate. So sometimes people say, oh, ask any ski professional. Oh yeah, I'm a really good skier. And they put on black and look like they're gonna, crash. Oh, they're not belong there. So how do people do it? There are many ways to do it. Like sometimes telling a story is a good way to do it. And here's a good lesson here. There's something called pre-framing where you can explain somebody something before you ask them a question. And that way they're better chance of them answering it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you were an advisor, Jack, and you said you had two clients in front of you, a husband and wife, and you said to them, you know what, my job is very easy. All I want to do is whatever anyone's been done for you before, any advisor's done for you before, I want to do for you the same thing, maybe even better. And they'll go, yeah, that sounds good. And you say, by the same token, anything that you didn't like for any other advisors you had, I don't want you to experience that again. And they'll go, yeah, yeah. And you'll say, but I don't know what that is. So I need to know what you liked, what you didn't like, what your experiences were like. In 2008, when the market's really bad, how did you react? In February last year, like, were you panicking? And they'll answer those questions to you because now you give them a reason why. And that's how you'll find out. Because the best way, I guess the long-winded way to answer the question is, what is their track record? How did they act before? Because when you manage money, you find out people's personality when the market is bad. You don't find it when it's good, typically. You find out when it's bad. Somebody said to me, money's like alcohol. It changes people's character. And another client of mine said, no, it reveals their character. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. So you want to find out what their comfort level is beforehand. And a lot of times people take it as, well, if I don't have 100% stock, I'm not macho or something like that. And they have to take that out of that because it is an emotional thing for them. But it's an excellent question, because if you're ever going to manage money professionally for individuals, you have to understand their nature, because some people are just more comfortable driving with mom. Some people are more comfortable driving with dad. There's not one better than the other, right? Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so as you can probably tell, like, I'm a young person, and like most people here are young
Everyone
people.
is younger than me here.
Yeah. So, and like I've been reading like a lot of like news about like the asset management industry in general. Stuff like passive investing is becoming more popular, and like automation's becoming, those like two, like, I guess, headwinds for the asset management industry. Yeah. So my question is, what is your outlook for the asset management industry, and what would you suggest to people who want to enter this?
Sure. That's a great and deep question. It is going to change, absolutely. The reason is, if you look at 30 years ago, there weren't as many capable people. There weren't as the computer, the technology wasn't as good. Today, everything is done so fast by such capable people that it's hard to get an edge. And so it's harder for the active managers to beat the passive benchmarks, if you will, because there's just so many people competing. And so what I think is going to change, I think what you're going to see, this is just my prediction, is that for the active managers, you're going to see them get smaller. In other words, not smaller in assets under management, smaller in kind of the way they build their portfolios, not having 300 stocks and 500 stocks, but having 20, 25, 30, because you'll get a better edge that way. They call those concentrated portfolios. And what I mean by that is, if I asked you all to pick your favorite books, and I said, go start now. Well, you probably name your favorite 5 books very easily. That's easy. Maybe even your 10, but then you start to stall about maybe 11, maybe at 12, maybe at 15, 20. Well, think about it as an investor. If I said pick your favorite stocks, you pick your favorite like that. But if I made you pick 150 in the fund, you'd start struggling. You go, well, I don't know. And then you start looking for like, well, this is not my best choice. I really like this company, but I'll buy their competitor and then another one. And so a lot of managers feel concentrated is the way to go because they can have an edge. They don't have to compete. They don't have to look like an index. I think that'll be part of it. I think that people will be more demanding of information, of what's going on and things like that. I think you're going to have a more blend of you're going to have more exchange traded funds, ETFs and stuff. In Canada and in the US, they have now active ETFs, which are more popular now. Before, ETFs were all passive. In other words, there's nobody making decisions other than the decision of what to put in every year. And so you're going to have more of that. And I think fees will come down. Absolutely. They're not going to go up. They're going to come down. And I think you'll see more specialists in the asset management, meaning that you're not going to see a plain vanilla funds like a US equity fund. You'll see more of a ESG, environmental, social governance, those kind of funds. You'll see, small cap value emerging market funds. You'll see more what I call specialty funds, because that way they'll have something different to manage, something more, a different kind of story to tell, and they'll be able to differentiate themselves from others. I think that's where the direction is going. Any other questions?
Yeah. So I was wondering, do you use any books or any websites to study industries? Like, how do you decide what industry you want to study for?
It's a great question. It's really hard to the reason you need teams as a fund manager, for example, institution manager, is because of what you just said. When you think about it, if you look at your mom and dad, for example, and you look at their jobs, they're probably really good at it. They've done it a long time. You have to to do something, you have to do it a lot and do it a long time. For me, when I moved to Canada, you guys are going to laugh, I knew nothing about agriculture. Canada is a very agriculture resource driven country. I didn't know what potash was. It's a fertilizer. I didn't know what potash was. So I learned about it and I was fascinated by it, but I knew I'd never be an expert. I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't want to visit farms, and it's a lot of work to do. And people who love it, and are good at it. So, so you don't have to be an expert at everything, and you'll never be an expert at everything, but you've been conversant and knowledgeable about stuff. So I would start with the things that you like. And where would I look them up? Let's say, for example, I like media. I'd look at the Disney Walt Disney annual reports, things like that. I'd look at magazines. Every industry has industry magazines. Like for my industry, we have magazines that are directed towards us that you might be bored reading, but we like it. Engineers have engineering magazines, lawyers have lawyer magazines. So you'll find out, you can just do a Google search and put in media magazines, healthcare magazines, and you'll find a lot of information there. A lot of it is available free at the library. Today, you guys have all this computer access. We didn't have it when I was a kid. Like I said, we were doing fractions when I started in the business. And when I moved to Canada in 1999, I remember asking people, do you have an email? I mean, not everyone had email back then. It was just starting out. So it was a very different time. Access is you have a good and bad. You have too much information in some cases. So it's overwhelming. And so I would start with looking at the different magazines that cover that. They all have trade publications. Trade publications mean they're not for regular people. Retail magazine for media would be like Entertainment Weekly or People Magazine, right? People who just like the actors and stuff. The stuff you're talking about is for the industry people. They're talking about video sales, movie sales, profits, losses, things like that, like industry stuff. So for any industry, I would look at that. There's books you can read, but there's so much information available on the internet. So books, trade publications, absolutely, because they use the language of the industry. You could subscribe to newsletters, a lot of free ones as well from the industry. They always want free, most of them want free subscribers because they could sell advertising more if they do, etc. So that's the best way to do it. Read interviews with managers who focus on those areas. I know I can do a Google search now and say like agriculture interview manager, and it'll give me a lot of different things. But the great thing is you have a lot of resources. I would start with the things that interest you, because you'll get bored too easily on stuff there's a lot of stuff doesn't interest me, as curious as I am. So I start with the things that do interest me, and then I branch out and I say, okay, because like when you think about it, like companies today are very complex. Like in Canada, we don't just have phone companies. Phone companies own cable, they own magazines. They're very different, right? They're conglomerates now. And a lot of businesses are like that. A lot of businesses that you think do one thing do a lot of things. And that's why it's good to be knowledgeable about a lot of different industries. So yeah, I would start with what interests you. Go on the internet, find magazines, trade publications, and you could put in trade publications so you get the specific ones you want. Look at interviews, things like that. That's a really good start.
Thank you.
Yeah, nothing but good questions here. I love it. Let me ask you guys, anyone can answer this. What compelled you to join this society? I mean, I'd never even heard of a society like this when I was your age. Like some people, join the basketball team. Some people join the, music group, and you guys might be doing that as well. But why this wonderful society?
Well, I always wanted to learn about investing. I really like mathematics, and I thought it was a really interesting concept, and it wasn't something I'd seen before, considering, it was all free and there was free lessons. And I was surprised to see, wow, this is actually available to everyone. And I wanted to give it a shot and see, what the organization had to offer. And since then, I've been always learning. I've gotten so much information and understanding that it's really crazy how much it has to offer, and it still has to offer. I haven't stopped learning from this organization.
You never stop learning. Like I said in the beginning, even if you don't do it for a career, I've learned so much more in talking to friends about their careers. Like one of my best friends my best friend in the States is a postman, and he tells me things. I get mail every day, almost every day, and he tells me things about it that fascinate me. If you talk to your parents, sit down with them one day and ask them about their jobs, and tell them, no, really, what do you do? Like, what do you do? Because, for example, people think lawyers, they watch TV and they think lawyers get in trial and go, you're guilty, admit it. And it's not like that. It's mostly paperwork, right? Which is fine. But you have to understand, whatever career you go into, you have to know what it really is on a day-to-day basis. And, finding out investing and finding about different companies just fascinating to me. I'm just continually interested in how people do business, how they make money. My son is 15, and we went to Universal a couple years ago, and he said to me, Dad, J.K. Rowling's, for creator Harry Potter, he goes, how much does she make on the films versus the amusement park? I thought, that's a great question. I looked it up. Well, that's a great question, because those are the kind of things that you find out when you read these reports and stuff. You find out the profit margins. Do you know that if you read the book on Netflix, they started because Blockbuster was the big dominant video company, and the guy who created Netflix, who started it, didn't like paying late fees. He found out that the biggest revenue source for the company was late fees. If when you go to a movie theater, the way they make money is not from the movie ticket sales, it's from the food. So if they didn't sell food, they wouldn't be that profitable, if profitable at all. And those are the kind of things you find out when you invest in companies. Fascinating things like that. Like, who would have thought it? Late fees is their biggest revenue source. That's where they make their profits. Popcorn and hot dogs. And so it's really interesting the way, I won't tell you how, but find out how Tesla makes their profit. Look it up, Google, you'll be shocked. Because I'd have to explain a little bit. Look out how Tesla makes their money. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying it's interesting to find out, because as an investor, you not only learn a lot, even if you're not going to invest in the company, but it helps you decide if you want to invest in the company. Because you might say, well, they're only being valued for earning this, but they're doing something else also. Or I think they're overvalued because I don't think this is going to continue. You find out companies like a Harley Davidson sells motorcycles, but they also lend you money to finance, right? And what that means, any company that sells and finances does really well at good times, right? Because people are buying a lot and borrowing money to do that. So they make money two ways. But when the economy falls, it's very troublesome, because not only aren't customers buying, the ones who bought from you aren't paying you. And so you can get hit really hard. So if you're a company that does sales and financing, you find that you get hit both ways, right? Not just no customers, but the people who you thought were going to pay you aren't paying you. It's fascinating stuff like that. And that's why, to me, investing is like a lifelong thing. For me, it's my career in that I'm in the industry, but even if it's not a career, I'd still keep up with it a little bit, because like you found out and your counterparts found out, it just satisfies your curiosity incredibly. And that's why I say when you ask me, I say start with what you're interested in, because you'll find out things you never knew. You absolutely will always find out things you never knew about something you thought you knew very well. And start with your parents. Ask them about their jobs.
For joining us today, Rebecca.
Rebecca is a friend of mine in Canada, and she's a CFA, which is the designation I mentioned. And for you, those going to a career, if you're going to go into a career thinking about it, I would say get your CFA sooner than later after you leave university, because it'll be fresh in your mind. All the math will be fresh in your mind. Do it after that. Would probably be the best time to do it. And you don't need it just to be an investment analyst. You can do it for a lot of things, but it's a very intellectually rigorous designation and well worth taking.
Can I jump in? What's great about the Young Investor Society is they actually have one of the CFA courses, early stage courses. So it gets everybody sort of who's interested familiar with what the designation is all about and the information that you can take forward with you wherever you are now. So yes, so thanks for that.
She did it. It was 3 years of hell, but she's still smiling. So tells you that you can do it as well.
Well, I will tell you, persistence pays off. It was more than 3 years.
Nice. Yeah. So that was a nice plug for our CFA Institute Investment Foundations program. All right, you guys. Well, I have another meeting, so I will see you. But David, thank you so much. It was great having you. I will be following up with you. Rebecca, always lovely to see you guys.
Likewise.
Thank you, Christine. Thank
Good
you
to
for
see
everyone.
everybody.
It's so great.
Have a good
Keep
rest
up the
of
great
night.
work and the great questions.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for
Thank you so
answering
much.
questions.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.